Alright, so let's get started. Because I've decided to vid with a 16:9 frame, and because I love this thing that Final Cut 7 does where it auto-detects the sequence settings, I'm going to use the EMH clip first so that it will determine the sequence settings from this. Now, if you're vidding in an older Final Cut, you may want to, it doesn't do this for you in Final Cut 5, for example. Then you have to choose your project settings before you start. And so in that case, you have to sort of think about it and decide what your project settings are going to be before you start vidding. Nicely with Final Cut 7, it'll detect it for you. So if you put down the clip that is representative of what you want your vid to look like, then it'll just auto-detect it. And if we click on the sequence and have a look at the sequence settings, you can see that it's set it to 1280 by 720, 720p, which is in fact the aspect ratio and resolution of the EMH footage. Now, do we necessarily want to export in 1280 by 720? Maybe not, because not all of our footage has that resolution. If you recall, the Antique had 640 by 272, right? So if I export it in that higher resolution, my lower resolution footage is not going to look quite so nice. So you may want to set it to custom and figure out your own smaller aspect ratio. There's all kinds of stuff you can do, but for now we're just going to leave this as it is. Pixel aspect ratio is square, as you see, which is great because that's going to match our other two pixel aspect ratios. Alright, so there's the EMH. Now let's go and plop the Farscape down. Let's see what we've got. There we go. Alright. So as you can see over here in the canvas, I've put the Farscape down in the timeline, and Final Cut has put it in so that it fits the frame, and therefore left these black bars on the left and right. As you recall, this is exactly what we saw in Calapine's vid, so if you wanted to do your aspect ratio where you end up having some letterboxing within the vid, you could just leave this like this, if you wanted to do that. Now, what a lot of people do at this stage is they go to the Motion tab, or equivalent, they go to Distort, and they change the aspect ratio of the image, right? Because I can take this and make it the right shape, right? And then I could zoom in on it. And it would fit. But when I've done that, I've distorted the shapes of everything in this image. And so this is, this is where you get people who their faces are weirdly skinny or weirdly fat, or where, the Stargate is shaped like an egg instead of like a circle, stuff like that. So let's not do that. Let's not go to Camelot. Let's leave it in its proper aspect ratio. In fact, I very rarely touch this distort section. And I would advise you never to do it unless you are starting with footage that's in the wrong aspect ratio. If you are importing footage that someone else has encoded or you've made a mistake with, it's the wrong aspect ratio, this is where you can fix it. Right? You can use this toggle to fix the aspect ratio. But if you've got everything right up to now, then it should already be its right aspect ratio. You shouldn't have to touch that. So what we're going to do instead is very simple. We're going to zoom the heck in on it, and then we're going to move it around until we can try to see as much as we want. Now here's the problem I was talking about earlier, right? I zoom in on the footage, so as you can see it just barely fits on the left and right. But as the wireframe indicates, we've got all this extra at the top and bottom that we've cut off, right? We have to crop it in order to make it fit this canvas size. And in cropping it, I've cut off the top of her head. So I can maybe move it a little bit, just grab it and move the center point. And I don't want to move it too far down because unfortunately with the height difference, I'm eventually going to start cutting off Rigel's lips, right? It doesn't look quite right. So you try to equalize it, you try to get it right. so what I've done is zoomed in on it using this scale button. I just moved it from 150 to 200. Sometimes you have to experiment with it. It depends on how many pixels are in your original. But zoomed in on it and then moved the center point around on the vertical axis. I don't want to move the center point on the horizontal axis because I have absolutely no play to the left and right. I've made it just big enough to fit left and right, and then I have a little bit of play on the top and bottom. Alright, so there's my Farscape image. And as you can see, Final Cut is auto cutting it off on the edges. I don't even have to crop. I could use the crop tool if I wanted to. Yeah, as it clicked on the right thing. You know, I could use that to bring it up, but I don't have to because Final Cut is going to make sure it fits the canvas anyway. So I can leave that extra footage there, and then, you know, maybe I export and I decide I really can't see enough of Rigel, so I may want to move this up a little bit, even if it means cutting off a little bit of Zan's ear. Right, I may find that later. So I like to leave it in. There's no real need to actually crop it. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and render that clip. Sure. Oh, poor computer. Alright, and now that that's rendered, we're going to go in and do the exact same thing with our antique clip, basically. So, set an in and out point. Plop it on down. And once again, you can see it fits all right to the left and right, but we've got these black bars at the top and bottom. I could leave it like that, but the black bars will export, and that'll be within the vid. So what I'm going to do instead is go to the Motion tab, once again, zoom in. Sometimes have to play around with it a little bit to figure out how much you need to zoom. 265. Perfect. And so now it's the exact same situation, but on a different axis, right? So now I've got lots of play to the left and right, but no play at all up and down. And as you can see, I've sort of cut off one of their faces a little bit, so I might want to move it a little bit like that, but I don't want to start cutting off his face either, so just have to make sure I get as much as I can into that frame. So you can see how it causes a little bit of problem sometimes to have to crop left and right or top and bottom, but ultimately it's very nice because what you end up with is this sort of aesthetically unified vid, right? You've brought all of your footage into the same aspect ratio, into the same canvas size, without squooshing anybody's face or making the Stargate into a star egg, right? So then when I go to export, I'm going to export it in my 16:9. Let's make sure this is set right first. Looks great. I'm going to export it in a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now I was vidding in the HD 1280 by 720. I might not export to that though because, like I said before, not all my footage has that resolution. If you don't see something in the drop down that suits, you can always use the custom option and type in your own. If you just go and Google common 16:9 aspect ratios, it'll give you a list. 854 by 480 is a really common one. So that's what I'm going to type in, and we're going to see how it looks. Test multi. Let's see how that comes out. Alright, so that's done. Let's go have a look at it. Alright, so came out nicely. We've got the nice 16:9 aspect ratio. Here's the EMH. Looks pretty good. There's the Farscape. And there's the antique. And as you can see, it's all made into one unified aspect ratio, and nobody is squooshed, and there are no black bars anywhere. So really, it's as simple as that. You don't need to do any math particularly. All you need to do is crop your footage in its native aspect ratio, whatever that may be, whether it's the old 4:3 or the 16:9 or the 235:1, bring it into your editing program, plop it into your timeline, and then zoom in and allow the editing program to crop out the stuff that's not going to fit the canvas, right? Don't mess with the aspect ratio, don't distort it, don't use that to try to make it fit. Don't change the aspect ratio and don't crop it when you're clipping. Just bring it right into the editing program and work with it here, because here you can actually see what you're doing. You can imagine now how badly it can go if you try to crop the image to the right aspect ratio from MPEG Streamclip, because then you don't know whose face you're cutting off, right? So pretty simple. You don't have to do any math, I promise, and it works very nicely. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.